raise as much as you want without applying for the prospectus, without issuing the full prospectus.
Hello, everybody. Value Tokenized broadcasting from France.
And our today's guest is also based in Europe, and more than that, his exchange is currently in the process of obtaining MiFID II license.
Luca Gubo, CEO of BlockTrade, will tell us about how to bridge crypto with institutional players, how to best choose a jurisdiction for security token exchange, and what gaps currently exist in European legislation. So, hi, Luca. Thank you very much for joining us. Can you maybe start by introducing yourself and telling a little bit about yourself?
Hi, thanks. So I was always at the intersection, trading, investing, and IT. Always did a bit of development myself, but I'm not a really good developer. But I can speak with the developers. So when I read about blockchain, it became immediately obvious for me how it can be used in basically financial markets, especially on the primary markets. When we saw this ICO phenomena, where companies and projects raised a lot of money. And the second part, more interesting for me, is that with blockchain you can enable straight-through processing, which is like full automation in financial markets from the trade to the settlement. So that's how basically I got into this whole thing.
And can you tell us a little bit more about BlockTrade? So you say that one of its major goals is to bring crypto markets closer to institutional investors. Can you tell a bit more about that?
Yeah, so BlockTrade is institutional grade crypto asset exchange. So if we define crypto assets broadly speaking, we have cryptocurrencies, we have also utility tokens, and we have this what is becoming to be well known as security tokens, meaning just financial instruments that are based on blockchain, meaning you can have share certificates in paper form, or you can have it in a digital form. So if you have it in a digital form, of course, then it's much more appropriate to be on blockchain compared to, let's say, Excel file. So BlockTrade has positioned itself as a secondary market for all these different types of crypto assets, especially for tokenized securities. The whole goal here is to bring liquidity to security token market ecosystem, because when issuers issue the tokens themselves, either shares or bonds or whatever securities, they are of course interested in having somebody trading them. If we target brokers and other like investment banks and so on, who already have their client base from institutional to retail and so on, we can just onboard one institutional client and get a lot of liquidity, a lot of demand. So what we are doing at BlockTrade is bringing the demand side to the whole ecosystem, so that institutional clients can also get access to crypto assets. And we're doing this by having superior technology, by having the technology being integrated with existing market infrastructures and basically all the protocols that we know from the old financial world, meaning SWIFT, the ISO 20022 standard, fixed protocol, and so on.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the licensing process that you're going through right now and the obstacles that you find on your way there?
Yeah, of course. That's basically, it's a link to what I just explained, to bring institutional capital to crypto markets. What's important is because financial institutions can only deal with other financial regulated institutions. So we are in the process of acquiring the so-called MiFID II license. Sorry, MiFID is pan-European legislation that governs all things related to financial instruments. And also one of the services that you can for regulated investment firm is to be so-called operator of a multilateral trading facility, the MTF. So MTF is just like the classical exchange where different financial instruments can be traded. The only difference between like the fully fledged so-called regulated market or stock exchange is that the MTF cannot facilitate IPOs. So we cannot directly help companies do the public offerings. But what we can do is do the direct listing. So when the issuer does the fundraising on their own and issue securities on blockchain, they can then bring them to us and list and start. We can basically offer them to institutions, and they can offer it to the public. So if you want to just list and be admitted to trading on an MTF, what's important is you don't need a full prospectus. So in Europe, you have so-called prospectus regulation and prospectus directive. And also in US, you have different exemptions. It's similar in Europe. So if we are in the process of getting the MTF, hopefully it will be with us soon. So it's just like playing ping pong with the regulators.
But hopefully you will get this license soon. And can you give us an estimate what costs are connected with like obtaining such a license or in general?
To get the license, the company has to be set in such a way. You have basically governance put up in place in such a way that it's compliant, meaning the board of directors has to be confirmed by the regulators. Also, the management has to be confirmed. Key roles inside the company, from like the internal audit to risk management, compliance officers, and so on. So the cost itself, it depends. If you go with the external lead advisors, the cost can be really, really high. Thankfully, we have the knowledge in-house, so we're able to prepare all the documentation ourselves. We also have a board and also management. I have two great guys who have experience in their own fields. It's hard to say.
And in your opinion, what jurisdiction suits best for a security token exchange? And for BlockTrade, why did you choose Liechtenstein over Switzerland?
Yeah, so what we wanted to have is to be pan-European. So one way to do it is to go, let's say, to maybe Malta or Gibraltar, where they definitely interesting if you try to bring business into a small country. But the problem here is that the laws that were like and implemented in Gibraltar and Malta are not accepted across Europe. Basically, a problem because when we're dealing with financial institutions, with regulated entities, what they want is they want to have a regulated counterparty on the other side under the same rules, not some. So Malta did quite copy pasting from basically from MiFID. So it's interesting to see that they're creating the parallel system for crypto markets. But I'm not really sure if that's the weird. We're incorporated in Liechtenstein, which is part of the European Economic Area, and they have implemented MiFID II. So we are applying under MiFID II legislation, just because we can then export our services across Europe. So from our perspective, Switzerland was another option. We didn't decide for it just because for cost, because if you want to operate an exchange there, you have to be a fully licensed bank, which is quite expensive. We are based in Liechtenstein because the regulators are really open and forward-looking, and it falls under this MiFID II just as anywhere in Europe.
And back to BlockTrade, can you tell us how it is different from traditional securities exchanges?
Yeah, so the difference is that the technology is different. So if you look from the legal side of things, we're structured just the same way as any other MTF would be. So the difference here is that how we integrate with custodians, with payment systems, and what is actually traded. So what we have developed is, of course, with our primary markets partners, just like they are like Securitized, that we can basically get the security tokens. They are deposited with a custodian. We have already partnerships with custodians who will be in the securities basically on their books, and then the tokens themselves will be traded on our exchange. So when the trade actually happens, what is done is just like in traditional system. We get an order who gets the order from their client. We then put the order on the order book. If it's matched, then what we do is do just additional checks. We do so-called and we issue trade confirmation. And soon after that, we issue so-called settlement instruction. The settlement instruction then goes to the custodian, and custodian then basically settles the trade. Basically, if the trade counterparties are both using the same custodian, it's just internal settlement. If the custodians are different, then the settlement is done between the custodians. Just payment versus delivery, just like traditional markets. So, and the goal, what we are doing with technology and the license and being fully complied with MiFID II is to have a similar, just streamline them in such a way that it can be a full straight-through process. So from the putting in the order to the settlement without intervention, without any manual processes, meaning you can TPO settlement. If something goes wrong, there still can be manual processes in place so that the trade actually gets settled.
And you just said about institutional players, and what about crypto exchanges? Will they be able to join the security token game?
So I think it will be really hard for them, because if you think about how, like in traditional markets, how like all the roles are segregated. So the exchange itself only matches the trade and sends the settlement instructions either to counterparties or directly to the custodian or even central security depository. And then you have the brokers. So brokers interact directly with retail clients. So things separate. But then you look at like a cryptocurrency exchange. So everything is bundled there. So they basically what they are a broker, they are an exchange, they are a custodian, they are a CSD, all combined to one end. The whole point of MiFID and MiFID II is to like separate those concerns, is to separate the risk. So I'm not sure if it will be easy for them to just apply for some license. Maybe they can do it in US. So under US legislation, as I read briefly, alternative trading systems can do basically all the elements and everything. But I'm not sure if this is something that like super large institutions are really happy to deal with ATSs. So our view is that if like in the existing system, but use like better technology and streamline the processes, we will get easier the institutional players on board.
Do you think that a new regulation is needed for tokenized assets, or existing one is just enough?
Yeah, so I think the existing regulation is, at least in Europe, is quite well written regarding we have so-called prospectus directive, which is then implemented into like national legislations. And if you go for like when you issue and you do the funding process, so it actually really doesn't matter how you do it from the technology perspective. The only part where I think there should be change, and this was like adopted regulation regarding central security depositories, so CSDs. That part is something that I would change. So the regulator, and the whole point here is that I think that legislation should change in such a way that companies, when they admit to trading, when they list to an exchange, they don't need to be with a CSD. Of course, there is a role for custodians, and custodian and CSD can usually be integrated into one. But still, on the primary market for the issuance of the security tokens, there is, I think, existing legislation, because it's mostly dealing with like investor protection. How does company communicate with investors? What has to be disclosed? If they go for full prospectus, then they have to apply a lot of rules from the prospectus directive. So I think the existing legislation is good enough. Maybe just slight adjustments regarding CSDs, or maybe just to formally define what the blockchain is. So what the basically decentralized ledger is being used for security tokens does.
I have one more question about jurisdictions. You once mentioned that fundraising process is much easier in Europe versus the US. Why is it so, and is it true?
There is a lot more liquidity in US, a lot more investors who are willing to invest into startups and basically companies. So what I meant by that is that from the legislation perspective, uh, under Prospectus Directive, there are a lot of exemptions. So one of the exemption is if you target only investors who are so-called accredited investors, who basically are high net worth individuals, then you can basically raise as much as you want without applying for the prospectus, without issuing the full prospectus. Additionally, you can also target 150 people for every member state in Europe, and still you don't need a prospectus. So there's quite a lot of people there, and there are a lot of different exemptions under prospectus directive, and the new one is being implemented this year. So that's definitely a positive thing. And also, what's important is from the investor's perspective is that when they invest, there is no lockup period. So there is no like waiting period for 12 months or 6 months like in US, because it can immediately be admitted to trading or sold peer to peer. So that's there are quite a few of those advantages in Europe, but the huge disadvantage is that on average, European investors are not as excited as US investors are regarding startups and regarding newest technologies. So if we could bridge those gaps, it would be definitely something that's highly valuable for companies that are doing fundraising.
I think I have one last question. Talking about investors, so a lot of companies that are now looking into doing an STO mention like fractional ownership and possibility of investors with lower checks to step in, which is like a major advantage. But it's not
Working
yeah,
yet?
it's not often like working on from the legal perspective. So not every jurisdiction actually allows it. But do you see blockchain and asset tokenization actually becoming this driver of democratization of the market, so to say?
Yeah. So if we think about like fractional ownership, when you own, let's say, a share of Apple, it's a fraction of the whole company. So you still have the fractional ownership. What I see important here as a fractional ownership is mostly liquid assets like paintings maybe or some art, which is it's hard to own a fraction of, can be tokenized and basically distributed across many different investors. So there will be a lot of asset classes that are, well, not really born, but that are accessible to retail investors, basically across the world, which were previously available, say VCs or some large institutional players. So there is a component of democratization in this technology. I think it will definitely bring additional liquidity. It will definitely take a lot of time.
I think this is it for today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Luca. It was very interesting and very comprehensive.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope to stay in touch with you and see you somewhere soon.